another lunch talk here at Great Journey.
Our first for the fall.
Yes, we had a long summer break, but now we're back with more lunch
With more
talks.
lunch talks. So we actually have a new setup here. So we actually have people here live, and we have people live in another version online.
Line and here.
And here. So the lunch talk is a concept that we are working with, that we are we're inviting people in here to talk about their profession or what they are working with from the industry.
Yeah, and we do it during lunch, so you guys who are here are having lunch and at the same time get some new perspective.
Yeah. If you're interested in more events coming up, like who is going to have next lunch talk and so on, please join our Discord. We'll post a link later on in the description of the YouTube video.
And you can also check out our previous lunch talks that we had this spring on our YouTube channel. So be sure to check that out.
Before we start everything, maybe we should present ourselves.
Sure. Sounds like a plan. Yeah.
So my name is Rosanna Johansson, and I am Community and Communication Manager here at The Great Journey.
And I'm Michael Forsman, and I'm the Studio Manager here at The Great Journey. And I think that's it for us.
For us and our introduction. So we're gonna leave the podium, and then we're gonna welcome Ryan Bengtsson here. Small, so we don't disturb the microphone.
Well, thank you. My name is Linda Ryan Bengtsson, as said, and I'm a researcher in media and communication studies at Karlstad University. So I do research and I teach. That's what I do. That's my industry perspective, if I'm also the industry today. What I'm going to do today is to present a research project that we conducted, I think it's about 2 years ago now. But I hope it still has bits and pieces that are interesting. And I hope to question your view on virtual reality a bit. That's sort of my aim, and that's also what we're trying to do with this research project, to look upon virtual reality and what it is in a slightly different way, at least. And I just wanted to start somewhere, and that was in about 2016-17. We had what one could call the second wave of virtual reality. And I think the education and the Great Journey is really a result of that. And in this project, we worked with Sticky Beat that did Frizon. It's about bullying or anti-bullying. And it really started this sort of hype around virtual reality again with Chris Milks. He had a TED talk talking about how good VR would be to actually give people emotions and possibly shift perspectives. And this image on the side there is from a research project where they did a virtual reality experience where actually in Aleppo were in a refugee camp while there are bombs falling. So to get some kind of experience of what it would be to be there. So we worked with Sticky Beak, as I said. Innovation Park was part of this project. We had a consultant company and they work with gender inequality. And that's sort of the aim of the project, or the point of the project that you will see. Also RISE, and we had some project money from Vinnova. And to me, being into, once again entering the virtual reality world, because I'm that old, so I was in the first wave, that was in the 90s, when you could really do technology that would allow you to be immersed or enter 3D worlds. And the whole hype around this is going to be the future, we're going to enter new worlds, we're going to see new things, it's going to be a lot of money within this. That whole hype was sort of, it struck me that it was so similar. So that was also why I thought it was interesting to get engaged with virtual reality again. So is this doing the same thing again, or is it actually evolving? What's happening in this area? So what one could say really happened then in 2016 was that it became very obvious that virtual reality, or claimed at least that virtual reality is very useful to shift perspectives and to work with this in real world problems, none the least within journalism. You saw BBC, the Daily News, etc. started to do virtual reality journalism, so that's grew as some way of showing the real picture of what was going on. So we wanted to address gender inequality as one of these issues that are important to address. So one thing was to address this issue within organizations and get a new way to work with gender inequality. And the company that we worked with already did that, but wasn't using virtual reality. They were using oral stories. And also to bring attention specifically to inequality and how that plays out in relation between work life and your private life, or the life outside work, and that really gender inequality issues happens within those different spheres. So we wanted to try that out in virtual reality, and how can that be done? So, as I'm a researcher, I need to place this in a previous research context, which is quite important. So there's been quite a lot of work around the pro-social change, changing perspectives. And that is suggesting that immersed experiences, being within a virtual reality, does make us emotional, evoke emotional responses. And we have a larger impact on people's perspectives. For example, as a young person, you're placed within an older person's body, and by doing so you can also get a perspective of what is it to be older. And that kind of shift in perspective does not only last within the time you're in the virtual reality, but also in long term. So you have that kind of studies. And it's not new in that sense to be using different kinds of media to shift perspectives. So using different kinds of sensorial material and narratives, telling stories, is a way that people have been doing this for quite a while. And it's usually called perspective taking, to offer new perspectives for people. And the point then why virtual reality would be better to do this for us than just reading a story or watching a film or whatever it could be, is that it really puts you into a situation that you experience as real, and that you relate to it as real, even though it's not real, which we all know. But still, we react as it's real. So if you're placed, like the image there, on top of a building, you get that sort of emotion, oh, I'm falling down, even though you know that you're actually standing on a floor. And you expect, you sort of accept that you're in a different world. And of course, the key thing then to be immersed and also putting to change your perspective is that you would bring the experiences you have in a virtual reality world into your everyday life. So here I put a picture of Second Life. Anyone been into Second Life? Yes? How long time ago?
10 years.
Yeah, exactly. So some of this research on how we bring our experiences in virtual reality into our everyday life was conducted in, for example, Second World. So it becomes part of our understanding of our real world, or whatever to call it. So there is some kind of idea that the more immersive a virtual reality experience is, the more we can also, or the larger is the possibility to change someone's perspective, to think differently about something. So, and generally you talk about 3 premises to be immersed, to be within a virtual reality and feel like you're there. And the first one is presence. So that you're actually there and that your virtual body is within this place. And there's a representation that you accept. And it's usually claimed that that happens because you're in the first person perspective, so that you're looking from your view around, which doesn't happen in any other kind of medium. So that's what's distinctive with virtual reality than other mediums. The other one is interactivity, and that's not unique for this medium, but it's really part of virtual reality, so that if you do something, something will happen. If you move your arms, your head, your legs, then you have a reaction within the environment. So it needs to be some kind of interactivity going on so that it feels that that's real and that's you're there. And the third one is plausibility. That is actually trustworthy, that you actually believe that's where you are. And that doesn't mean that it has to look like the real world, but you accept that this is where you are. So you actually start, for example, driving the car and the road is obviously turning somewhere, so you actually move in accordance to what you're seeing, even though that's not the real world. So presence, plausibility, and interactivity are central aspects of creating immersion. So what did we do then to try out these? And those three perspectives were quite important to us when we did this research. So we already had a set of sceneries and a method. So this method is you work in small groups in a workplace and you get a story of something that happens and then you discuss it. So we already had these stories and they are built on research that was conducted, interview research that was conducted by Cecilia Nonfeldt. So it's really true, real stories, but depersonalized of what can happen in a workplace. And the point is to discuss and put issues on the table. It shouldn't be judgmental, it's no right or wrong, but it should be able for you to discuss. So we put these into 3 different scenarios. That's how we talked about them, but they're actually 3 different virtual reality projects or settings or whatever we'd like to put it. And we wanted to give these different scenarios different levels of presence or interactivity and plausibility so that we could play around with these different perspectives. So we wanted to see if there's a difference between the experience of immersion and the experience of these virtual reality scenarios and how you understand them in different ways. So this is the first one we did. And we called it the office announcement. So what happens is that you are entering a room, so it's a first-person perspective. You are there. The others in the room greets you, so you really get the feeling of that you're there. And you sit down next to a table, and the rest of the people comes in, and it's a meeting. You sort of get that it's a meeting. And what happens is that the boss announces that we're now going to work differently when it's about scheduling. Everyone can make their own schedule or set when they want to work. And no one really says anything, everyone seems happy about it. So that's the first part of the scenery. The next part is that you're setting the one to the right. You see the leadership talking to each other, and it turns out that this didn't work particularly well. The personnel doesn't like this setting, but it hasn't really gotten through. So they're informed by the secretary that it's actually because some has the right to book the time that they're working before others. There's some kind of inequality in who gets to work when that started to happen. So something that sounds good from the beginning for most of you, because you can work whenever you want to, now becomes a problem. And in the next scenery, you re-enter the announcement the first time you were, the first scenery, but now you get a graphical interface telling what they think. And you can tell that everyone wasn't as happy as you thought, and different people reacted differently. So that's the 3 different, and then you go into a discussion about what happened, why, and how could that be. The second we have called Monday morning meeting, and it's a 3D environment. The other one was made in a 360 camera, could be good to know, and with actors as you saw. But this is a 3D rendering, and you are a person, and you enter a room in the morning, and you're all men in this room, and you tell your colleagues that you have organized picking up your child in daycare with your family in a good way, so now you can work in a different way. But what happens is that the colleagues make fun of him and doesn't really think it's such a great idea as he does. And he can answer back to his colleagues in different ways, while doing this, so it's some kind of interactivity as well, but it doesn't really shift the course of the event. And this is run 3 times, but in 3 different settings. So it's just an everyday office, it's a mechanic shop, and architecture company. So it's the same scenery, but in 3 different, or the same scene, but in 3 different sceneries. And the third one, we call it the coffee break. You're not present here. You're not a person, you're not given a body. So you're more like a fly on the wall. And the first scenery, you see these women sitting at a table, obviously having their fika, as we do. But they're not talking to each other. They're kind of just looking to each other. In the second scenery, you run the same thing, but you get to listen to the voice of the one reading the newspaper. And you do that by looking at her, and it zooms in like this, so it's like you're going into her head in a way, and you listen to her and her way of thinking. And then the third time you run it, you get to listen to the other woman, or you can actually move between the women. And what it turns out to be is that the woman reading the newspaper thinks the other woman is angry with her and that she's done something wrong in the workplace. Whereas when you listen to the woman looking at the mobile phone, she's actually worrying about her child being at daycare for the first time, and that worries her. And she's waiting for a message from the daycare to tell her that everything is fine. So the whole situation, depending on the perspective, you know, you understand that situation differently. Sorry. So what we did was to, we had 3 people, which is very little data in many ways, but we actually used experts on gender inequality and that work with these issues in organizations. So we thought it was quite useful to have them to consider, so how would this work in also a workplace. So they also knew the original material because they had worked with it before. And they were also very known in moderating different kinds of groups. So we wanted to see, so how did presence, interactivity, plausibility, and immersion function within these? And we had walkthroughs, so they would look at one part of the scenery, write down or draw, and then talk to us, and do that for each one, and then a longer interview with each of them, and then they also had a group discussion together. So, what happened then? What did we get out of the data? So, something that we thought was quite interesting is they were quite ambiguous about this experience. They were both there and not there at the same time. They were in dissonance with the experience. They didn't understand how and in what way to work, what it did to them. But still, it seemed like the scenarios fulfilled the purpose. So they could still ask those critical questions. They could still think about what happened in the scenario, even though they didn't feel that fully immersion as you would expect. So this sort of lack of being fully immersed wasn't really a problem. Or to not be in control of your virtual body wasn't really either a problem. But it allowed for experiences of being disempowered and being exposed to something that you hadn't been, a situation that you hadn't been in before. So I'm going to be more specific in how. So, for example, when they entered this scenario, the Monday morning meeting, they felt that they were all of a sudden in a room with all these 3D people, and as you see, it's quite jaggy. It's not rendered particularly highly, so it's quite hard to also see what they think, really, their facial expressions. So they really had to try to understand, so who am I in this? What do I feel? And they couldn't look upon themselves because they couldn't see the person they were. So they really wanted to actually step out of that virtual body and then to look at the body so they could understand what the body was thinking. So one expression is, I wanted to crawl into Ronnie's skin to see his facial expression when he says what he says and how he takes the comments he gets. Is he irritated, or does he also think it's fun? And another one said, I had to tune into Ronnie's situation. Ronnie is the guy you are, and how does he feel? But then also what happens is that when one begins to reflect on what someone else is doing, what is happening, how will this affect his or her situation, then it became really deep, and then you turn inwards. So it also got them to reflect about, so who am I, and how do I actually react in this situation? What can I do, what can't I? So you don't really have to be present fully. You can actually move in between being present and absent in a way. Then to interactivity. That you couldn't interact actually made you engaged. And usually interactivity is what makes engagement, not only in virtual reality, but also claimed to do in other types of interactive media. So in action, being silent, because you couldn't really answer in this meeting position, in the announcement, actually made you feel in a certain way. So, for example, after the announcement, you got a feeling of, there you wanted to say stop. No, you shouldn't do it like this. But I couldn't do a thing. So it couldn't change the course of events. When I'm present, it's really disturbing that I can't say anything. Then I am part of the imbalance in the room. And that's really what you want to show, right? That's part of inequality in the room, that you actually can't. You're sort of enabled to say something, and it's hard to do it. So yes, and then I am the dilemma. And of course, if you're silent, you are the dilemma. That was super insightful. And I think this is also quite interesting reflections from people that already know the material. They still saw new things and could reflect upon this situation. So lack of interactivity can also be quite useful. And then plausibility. So it also allowed for reflection in different way, and especially showing that preconceptions can be brought forward. So, for example, one of the people said that, oh, that woman, she can't be a given first childbirth because she's too old. Which is like a woman in her 40s can definitely give birth to her first child in her 40s. But you have these preconceptions of who can be a mother and not, and what is trustworthy or plausible. So this was actually something that you didn't think it was plausible, it wasn't trustworthy, but it's actually showing that you as a person have a preconception of who can be what. And also how the use of not being a body, you don't have to be a body within a virtual reality, which is also often claimed to be part of the plausibility, because you have a body, that's what we have in our real life. You could use the function of going in and out of different people. So going into one person's thought and then going to another person's thought actually allowed you to reflect on the question deeper, because you could see the problem and the problem between the two and what it did to them. Also that challenging plausibility was also in the morning meeting scenario, where you could see that some of the people said that it wasn't trustworthy that this would happen in the architect office, but it's trustworthy that it can happen in car mechanics, which is really also a preconception of what is said and done where. So using this could actually bring those issues on the table also. So we argue then that we can have virtual presence and virtual distance simultaneously. So it doesn't have to be that experience of being there. It could also be the problem of not being there that is actually helping you to understand a specific situation and allow you to shift your perspective. Interactivity can be really awkward. It can be not what you expect it to be. We like to talk about interactivity. It should be simple and seamless, and you should be able to get quickly to where you want to go. But if you limit it, that also says something about what you can do and can't do. And then implausibility. And that it actually can help you to bring attention to the discrepancy between your expectation of something and your preconceptions of something. if it's actually not following the idea of plausibility. So that's why we try to work with new types of concepts to bring this into focus. So virtual presence and virtual distance as opposites, awkward interactivity than just interactivity with the idea of that it should actually be a perfect interactivity, and implausibility. It doesn't have to be exactly what you expect it to be. It could also be the other, something else. So to get to the end of this, I have no idea where I am in time right now. But
10 minutes left.
good, great, perfect. So we like to talk about it as glitches. We have a tendency, especially in technology development, when there's a glitch, there's something that is wrong, and where there's something that shouldn't be working. But glitches are more interesting than we think. Think about Matrix, for example, a film that really revolves around glitches. So there are glitches, and they can be quite useful if we actually spend time on looking at what they do and what they mean for us. So we should actually go deeper into virtual distance, awkward interactions, and implausible scenarios, and that this will contribute to another type of experience, or a more interesting type of experience than rather not looking at these glitches and move away from these glitches. So, thank you. So if there's any questions, thoughts, do you agree with me? You might disagree, which you're very welcome to do, because not everyone does agree with us. We're sort of putting our chin out there saying that, because there's quite a strong idea of what virtual reality is. And to me, yes, it can be, but we also need to explore. I think as a designer or an artist or a game developer, you want to do all different kinds of things. Then the medium isn't defined. It could be whatever you'd like it to be. And we're sort of missing that sometimes in virtual reality, I think. Yes?
Well, it feels as though most VR things that are coming out today, like the HTC Vive and Oculus Quest and things, are more directed towards gaming, and they're definitely opening up a lot with vision generating up sticks, and now can you even see your hands. It feels exciting, but it doesn't really feel enough yet to merit being called virtual reality.
Yes.
For me, I see it as another kind of more immersive screen.
Yeah.
Until we're better able to deal with the rendering issues of only focusing on rendering what's directly in front of you instead of wasting all resources on what you're not directly looking at. Have you ever heard of a book called Ready Player One?
No?
It's very, in the book there's a thing called the Oasis, which is then virtual reality. It's set
Yeah.
pretty far in the future, and they have haptic gloves that have
Yeah.
touch sensation and tracks that you can walk on. So they're actually existing in the world on a lot more levels than just
Visual. Yeah.
visual and auditory. And
Yeah.
there's some, I think Boneworks is what it's called, a new Steam German VR thing that has, you can actually grab things.
Yeah,
There's touch
exactly.
sensitive,
Yeah.
which feels like a step in the right direction, but I'm more interested to see where VR is going to go in 20 years as long as people hang with it, so it doesn't get dropped like that old Nintendo VR thing.
Exactly. And I think you're very right. And that idea that you're talking about, that it still isn't good enough, that was also the experience we had in the 90s, right? So we had this idea that you're going to, and they already talked about the gloves, and you had the helmet, and you had the breathing, you had the whole, but we're still not there, and it's especially not accessible to us. But in the meantime also, we do have partly this kind of technology that is partly doing this, and partly not. And I think it would be quite important or interesting to explore what does it not, instead of always constantly trying to work with, so how do we get this experience of full immersion? So how can we use it differently? It's there in its simpler form, and yes, maybe in 20 years when we are in the third wave of virtual reality, then maybe we are there, but we're not there yet. But it's still like any like film or photography or whatever, internet, any kind of medium, to explore it in whatever technology it is more interesting than just leaving it until you reach full immersion. But it's so attached to the medium itself that it's really difficult to question, I think. But it needs to be questioned, because as you say, we're definitely not there.
Do you have any ideas on what people themselves could do to keep this second wave going a lot longer? Because if we compare the Oculus Rift, the very first one, to the first iPhone, now with the iPhone 11 they're not the same thing. But they continue. Apple, for better or for worse, has released a phone every single year since then, and now it's fantastic. But maybe VR would have gone a lot longer if Nintendo probably had stuck with it back in the 80s and kept at it. But now it feels as though if we have to wait for a separate third wave, then there's a bunch of time that somebody else could have. There's other companies
Yeah, then you
working
could
on walking pads and all sorts of things,
Yeah.
but if you're not involved with a VR company, is there anything that other people can, is there anything anyone can do to try to keep that second wave going and develop as much as possible?
Where I see it happening mostly is within artistic work. And then, of course, playing around with that, it's not fully immersive. And you have some development then of, shifting perspectives, but it's really in the laboratory still. It's really, it's the big universities that have research money, or it's the big companies that can afford and work with it. That's why I get very happy when I fall into music videos that use simple 360 camera to do their music video, and you can choose to look at it, in your cardboard box, or 3D, or to watch it on YouTube. And then some people would say, but that's not virtual reality. No, maybe not, and that's fine if you don't think so. But what if we at least look upon it as a medium that needs to be explored in different ways? And I think that's one of the reasons why it's so hard to see new developments, is because it's so attached to this idea of being fully immersive. It's a problem for the medium itself, I think.
Withdraw expectations.
Yeah, exactly. It's got such a high expectations that you can never fulfill. What if you just let go of them and just see it like it's an experimental movie, or a website that someone played around with? Then it becomes so much more interesting to work with, I think. And that's why we think it's important to build concepts for that allows you to think of it differently. And maybe the concept should be totally different than the ones we developed, but at least it gives you one sort of way into thinking about it in another way than we do right now. No?
I think we are done for today.
Yes.
It was like, oh, I'm going to watch, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me and for listening.
Thank you so much for coming here. So, yeah, this was today's lunch talk.
Yes.
We're gonna put it up on YouTube later on if you want to rewatch it or spread it to your friends. So, thank you so much for tuning in and coming here.